Let's read.
All right, autumn in Brambly Hedge. It was a fine autumn. The blackberries were ripe, and the nuts were ready, and the mice of Brambly Hedge were very busy. Every morning they went out into the fields to gather seeds, berries, and roots, which they took back to the store stump and carefully stowed away for the winter ahead. The store stump was warm inside and smelled deliciously of bramble jelly and rising bread, and it was always full. Lord Woodmouse, who lived in the old oak palace, was out with his youngest daughter, Primrose. "Now keep close to me and don't get lost," he said. As they made their way along the blackberry bushes, Primrose picked the berries nearest the ground while his father hooked the upper branches down with his walking stick. The basket was nearly full when they were joined by old Mrs. Eyebright. "I've been looking for you," she said. "Bad weather's on its way. I can feel it in my bones. We must finish our harvesting before the rain begins." Lord Woodmouse sent Primrose back to the palace and then went to the store stump to find Mr. Apple to make arrangements. Soon parties of mice with carts and wheelbarrows were hurrying out to the fields to gather the last of the nuts and the berries. Lord and Lady Woodmouse decided to help pick mushrooms, and they were just setting off when Lady Woodmouse cried out in alarm, "Where is Primrose?" She was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't hiding in the baskets, or under the leaves, or in the long grass. "Has anyone seen Primrose?" shouted Lord Woodmouse. "She hasn't been here," replied the mice, gathering berries high in the blackthorn bush. "We haven't seen her," called the mice in the tangly hawthorn trees. The children thought that she was at her grandmother's house, and a search party was sent along to investigate. Hot and out of breath, they knocked at the door of Crabapple Cottage. "Have you seen Primrose?" asked Wilfred. "We've lost her." Mrs. Apple shook her head and took off her apron, joining in the search. Mr. Apple ran over to the gap in the hedge by the store stump. "Primrose, where are you?" he cried. "Primrose, where are you?" echoed the call across the cornfield. Lord and Lady Woodmouse went back to the palace. They looked in the cupboards and under the beds. The store stump was searched from top to bottom. "Oh dear," said Lady Daisy. "She's such a little mouse. Where can she be? What will we do?" Meanwhile, Primrose, wandering along the edge of the cornfield, was quite unaware of her parents' concern. She'd spent the morning picking wild flowers and gazing up at the blue sky, and after a lunch of blackberries, she had dozed a little in the sun. She was just going to help a group of mice she'd seen gathering seeds in the ditch when she spotted a little round house high up in the stalks of corn. "I wonder who lives there," she thought, and decided to climb up and peep through one of the windows. As she looked in, she saw 2 pair of bright little eyes peering back at her. I do beg your pardon," she stammered and began to climb down again. "We were just going to have tea," a voice called after her. "Won't you join us?" Primrose found the tiny front door and went inside. It was very cozy. There was a thistle-down carpet on the floor, and neatly woven grass walls were covered with books and pictures. The 2 elderly harvest mice who lived in the house were very glad to have a visitor. They sat Primrose down, gave her a slice of cake, and handed her their album of family portraits to look at. When Primrose had been shown all their treasures, she thanked the mice politely and climbed down to the ground again. She decided to walk to the edge of the chestnut woods before she went home. Some Brambly Hedge mice were still there, picking blackberries in the last of the evening sun, but they were too busy to notice her. She peered into the grasses, looking for the feathers and other useful things. Hidden in the brambles, she discovered a very interesting hole. "I wonder if anyone lives down there," she said to herself, and wandered into the tunnel. It was very dark inside, but she could see round front doors set in the walls with the branching passages. As she went deeper in the tunnel, it became darker still, and soon Primrose could see nothing at all. "I don't think I like this place," said Primrose, with a shiver. "I'm going home." She turned to leave, but with so many passages leading this way and that, she had no idea which way she'd come. She picked up her skirts and ran through the maze of tunnels. At last, she saw a glimmer of light and ran towards it. The passage opened into a thick clump of brambles and briars under some tall trees. Primrose had no idea where she was. "I can't see the oak tree," she said in a small voice, "and I can't see the willow by the stream. I think I must be lost." It was getting very dark. Big drops of rain began to fall and splash through the leaves around her. Primrose huddled under a toadstool and tried not to cry. In the distance, a lonely owl hooted, "Hoo hoo." and the branches of the trees above creaked in the rising wind. There were little scrabbling noises in the bush quite near Primrose, and these worried her most of all. It got darker and darker, and soon everything disappeared in the night. Primrose was just trying not to think about weasels when, to her horror, she saw 5 flickering lights coming through the woods towards her, making out 5 strange figures behind them. They were shapeless and bulgy and seemed to have no heads. Primrose wiggled further back in the brambles. The figures came closer and closer, and Primrose realized they were going to pass right by her hiding place. The nearer they came, the worse they looked, and she shut her eyes as she heard them pass by, only a whisker from where she was sitting. 1, 2, 3, 4. She decided to be very brave and take a peek at the 5th one. It walked with a limp, and it had a tail and whiskers, and it was wearing Mr. Apple's trousers. "Oh, Grandpa!" she squeaked with delight. And as each of the figures turned round, she recognized them. Mr. Apple, Mrs. Apple, Dusty Dogwood, and the best of all, her own mother and father. Primrose pushed her way through the brambles. "Primrose!" cried Lady Daisy. "You're safe!" "The harvest mice said you'd gone into the woods, but it was so dark and wet that we'd almost given up finding you," said her father. And he picked her up and wrapped her snugly in his cloak. Primrose was nearly asleep by the time they got home. Lady Woodmouse carried her up to her little room and took off her wet clothes. A clean nightie was warming by the fire, and a mug of hot acorn coffee had been placed on the bed. "I'll never go out of the field on my own again," Primrose whispered sleepily. Her mother gave her a kiss and soothed her pillow. "Ease your whiskers, rest your paws, pies and puddings for the stores. Sweetly dream the night away, till sunshine brings another day," she sang softly, tucking Primrose into her comfy bed.